Jake Wilson tossed another wrench into his toolbox and sighed. Another day, another handful of credits that barely covered the electric bill. His repair shop on Outpost Meridian wasn't exactly thriving. The place was a dump, honestly. Flickering lights, rust on every surface, and the kind of quiet that made you realize just how alone you were out here on the edge of nowhere. Meridian was one of those settlements nobody talked about unless they had to. It sat in contested space, right where three territories met, but none of them really wanted to claim it. Mostly, it served as a dumping ground for refugees. Ships would arrive weekly, packed with people running from wars they didn't start, looking for anywhere that might be safe. The Dragon Empress's expansion had displaced millions. Her fleets conquered system after system, and the survivors washed up on stations like this one. Jake didn't mind the refugees. Hell, he'd been one himself once, back when he was a kid. Different war, same story. That's probably why he stayed in this miserable corner of space, fixing beaten-down ships for people who could barely afford to pay him. Tonight was different. He'd gotten word about a derelict transport floating near the station. Some refugee ship that had lost power and been abandoned. Station authority didn't care enough to salvage it, which meant free pickings for anyone brave or stupid enough to go out there. Jake needed parts. The plasma regulator in Bay 3 was shot, and he'd promised old Henry he'd have his shuttle running by Tuesday. So Jake suited up, took his little maintenance pod, and went hunting for scrap. The transport was a mess. Burn marks along the hull, airlocks forced open, the whole thing spinning slowly in the black. Jake maglocked to the outer hull and made his way inside. Emergency lighting gave everything this sick green color. His boots echoed on the metal floors as he walked through empty corridors. Most of the cargo hold had been picked clean already. Figures. He was never first to anything. But then, from somewhere deeper in the hold, he heard something. A sound that definitely shouldn't be there. Whimpering. Jake froze. His hand went to the plasma cutter on his belt. Out here, you never knew what you'd find. Could be scavengers. Could be worse. He moved carefully toward the sound, past empty crates and scattered supplies. In the far corner, behind a fallen storage container, he found them. 2 dragons. Jake's heart stopped. Dragons. Actual dragons. The species that ruled half the known galaxy, whose Empress commanded fleets that could crack planets. And these 2 were here, in this garbage heap of a ship, looking like they were half dead. They were small. Hatchlings, maybe. No bigger than house cats, though Jake knew they'd grow to the size of shuttlecraft eventually. Their scales were dull, like tarnished metal. He could see their ribs through their skin. Their eyes were huge and terrified, reflecting his headlamp like mirrors. One of them hissed weakly. The other just stared at him with this look that Jake recognized immediately. Pure, desperate fear. Jake should have left. Should have backed away slowly, sealed the airlock, and pretended he never saw them. Dragons meant complications. Dragons meant danger. The Empress's people didn't take kindly to anyone messing with their kind, even refugee hatchlings. But Jake stood there, looking at 2 starving kids, and couldn't make himself leave. They were children. Didn't matter what species. They were scared and hungry and alone, and he knew exactly what that felt like. Jake knelt slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening. He reached into his utility pouch and pulled out his lunch. 2 protein bars and a pack of synth meat jerky. It was supposed to last him the next 6 hours, but he could skip a meal. He unwrapped a protein bar and slid it across the floor toward them. The hatchlings pressed themselves against the wall, trembling. But their eyes tracked the food. Jake could practically feel how hungry they were. Minutes passed. Jake didn't move. Finally, the braver one, scales just slightly more bronze than the other, crept forward. It sniffed the protein bar, then snatched it and retreated, eating frantically. The second hatchling, this one with darker scales that might have been black if they weren't so dull, watched its companion eat before gathering courage to take the jerky Jake offered. They ate like they hadn't seen food in weeks. Probably hadn't. Jake made a decision that would change his entire life. He pulled off his jacket and carefully, slowly, scooped both hatchlings into it. They were too weak to fight much. He bundled them against his chest, feeling their tiny hearts racing. Getting them back to the station without being seen was going to be tricky. Dragons were registered imports. You couldn't just bring them onto human stations without permits, genetic documentation, ownership papers. These 2 had nothing. They were ghosts. Jake hid them in his empty toolbox, the big industrial one he used for salvage runs. He poked air holes in the side and prayed they'd stay quiet during the trip back. Station security waved him through without a second glance. They knew Jake. Just another scavenger hauling junk. Back at his shop, Jake set the toolbox down gently and opened it. Two pairs of reptilian eyes stared up at him. He'd committed now. No going back. He cleared out his storage closet, threw down some old blankets, and made them a nest. Then he raided his entire week's food supply. Protein bars, synth meat, even the real chicken he'd been saving for something special. He laid it all out and watched as the hatchlings ate themselves into unconsciousness. When they finally slept, curled around each other in the blankets, Jake sat on the floor and wondered what the hell he'd just done. The bronze one stirred, opened one eye, looked at Jake for a long moment. Then it made a sound, soft and rumbling. Almost like a purr. Jake smiled despite himself. He'd name them tomorrow. Tonight, he'd just keep them warm and safe. That's all they needed. That's all anyone needed, really. 5 years changed everything in ways Jake never imagined that first night. The hatchlings he'd hidden in his toolbox were now the size of cargo shuttles. Ember, the bronze one who'd been brave enough to take that first protein bar, had grown into a graceful dragon with scales that actually shimmered like polished metal now that she was properly fed. Ash, her darker companion, was stockier and more reserved, his scales a deep charcoal that caught the light when he moved. They'd outgrown the storage closet after 3 months. Then they'd outgrown the back room. Now they basically lived in the main repair bay, which Jake had expanded twice just to give them space. The shop looked different these days. Reinforced floors to handle their weight. A charging station modified to warm their sleeping area. Ventilation systems that could handle the occasional burst of dragon fire. That had been a learning experience. The first time Ash sneezed and accidentally melted Jake's favorite workbench, they'd both panicked. Now it was just something they laughed about. Yeah, laughed. Because somewhere along the way, Ember and Ash had learned to talk. It started with mimicry. Ember copying the sounds Jake made when he was frustrated with a stubborn bolt. Then simple words. Then full sentences that came out in this deep, rumbling voice that made Jake's tools rattle on their hooks. "Morning, Jake," Ember said one day, and Jake had dropped his coffee mug. Now they never shut up. Well, Ember didn't. Ash was still the quiet type, but when he did speak, you listened. The work changed too. What used to take Jake hours now took minutes with their help. Ash could lift engine components that would have required 3 humans and a crane. His fire breath, once wild and unpredictable, was now precise enough to weld hull breaches with surgical accuracy. Ember's claws, delicate despite their size, could handle the tiny electronics that Jake's aging eyes struggled with. They made a good team. Better than good. People on the station had been suspicious at first. Dragons living openly with a human? Unheard of. Dangerous, some said. But Ember had a way with folks. She'd started spending time in the central plaza, letting the refugee kids climb on her wings. She'd help elderly residents carry their supplies. Once, she'd pulled a woman from a burning hab unit while everyone else just stood there in shock. Ash was different. He didn't do friendly. But when the Scorpion gang tried to shake down the dock workers for protection money, Ash had shown up and stared at them until they left. Didn't say a word. Didn't have to. After that, the dock was the safest place on the station. The 3 of them fell into a rhythm. Early mornings, Jake would make coffee while Ember and Ash did their stretching exercises in the bay. They'd work through the day, fixing whatever broken ships or equipment people brought them. Evenings, they'd sit on the observation deck and watch the stars. That's when Ember and Ash would talk about their past. They did it in pieces, like it hurt too much to tell the whole story at once. They were nobility. House Thorn, they called it. Their family had been important in the Dragon Empress's court. But they'd spoken out against the expansion wars, said the Empress was making mistakes, causing too much suffering. Dragons weren't supposed to question the Empress. Especially not publicly. The purge had been swift. Ember and Ash's parents, their siblings, their extended family. All executed for treason. Ember had been 4 years old. Ash had been 3. A guard named Brennan, loyal to their house, had smuggled them onto a refugee transport. He was supposed to die doing it. They'd watched him fall, surrounded by Empress's soldiers, as their ship jumped to safety. After that, they drifted. The transport lost power. People abandoned ship. 2 dragon hatchlings, alone and starving, waiting to die in the dark. Until Jake found them. "You saved our lives," Ember said one night, her massive head resting near Jake's chair. Jake shrugged. "Just gave you some protein bars. Nothing special." "Everything special," Ash rumbled from his corner. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it counted. The truth was, they'd saved each other. Jake had been going through the motions before they came along. Fixing ships, earning just enough to survive, wondering what the point of it all was. Now he had a family. Weird, cross-species, probably illegal in 15 different jurisdictions, but family nonetheless. They had routines. Ember loved human movies and would watch them on Jake's ancient holoscreen, asking a million questions about why humans did such strange things. Ash had discovered music and would sometimes hum along to the radio, this deep bass vibration that made the whole shop resonate. Jake taught them about engines and circuits and the 1,000 little tricks you learned after years of keeping broken things running. They taught him about dragon history, their language, the way they saw the world through eyes that could spot heat signatures and electromagnetic fields. The station's humans accepted them eventually. They were just part of the community now. Jake's dragons, people called them, though Jake hated that. They weren't his. They were their own people who just happened to live with him. Business actually improved. Turned out people trusted a mechanic who had dragons vouching for his work. Ship captains would come from 3 systems away to get repairs from that human with the dragon crew. Jake raised his prices. Not much, but enough to buy real food instead of synth meat. Enough to upgrade his equipment. Enough to feel like maybe life was getting better. He should have known it couldn't last. The day the Empress's guard arrived, Jake was under a freighter hull, Ash holding the entire ship up with his back while Jake replaced a cracked support beam. Ember was at the parts supplier, chatting with the owner's daughter who'd become her friend. Then the alarms started blaring. 3 massive warships dropping out of hyperspace, right on top of the station. Imperial marks on their hulls. Ash lowered the freighter carefully and looked at Jake with eyes that suddenly looked young again. Scared again. "They found us," he whispered. And Jake realized their peaceful 5 years had just ended. The warships appeared without warning, dropping out of hyperspace so close to the station that proximity alarms screamed throughout every level. Jake had never seen Imperial vessels up close before. They were massive, each one larger than the entire station, their hulls decorated with the Empress's seal in gold that caught the light of the nearby star. Within minutes, the docking bays were flooded with soldiers. Not the scrappy mercenaries or worn-down security forces Jake was used to seeing. These were the Empress's guard. Elite warriors in ceremonial armor that probably cost more than Jake's entire shop. They moved with precision, scanning every corridor, every hab unit, every person who crossed their path. The station went silent. People locked their doors. Parents pulled children inside. Everyone knew what the guard meant. When the Empress sent her personal forces, someone was about to have a very bad day. Jake pulled the bay doors halfway down and motioned for Ash to get below. The dragon hesitated, his protective instincts warring with survival sense. "Please," Jake said quietly. "Let me handle this." Ash's claws scraped against the floor, but he moved toward the lower maintenance level. Ember returned through the side entrance, her scales pale with fear. She'd seen the ships. "Go with your brother," Jake told her. "Stay quiet. Stay hidden. Whatever happens, don't come up until I call for you." "Jake," Ember's voice cracked. "Trust me. Please." They disappeared below just as heavy footsteps echoed outside. Jake grabbed a wrench, more for something to do with his hands than any real defense, and waited. The bay doors buckled inward. Not violently, just a demonstration of strength. Then they slid open to reveal a dragon that made Ember and Ash look like children. This warrior stood nearly 20 feet tall, covered in battle scars that told stories of 100 fights. His armor was black and gold, fitted perfectly to his massive frame. His eyes glowed with an inner fire that suggested he could incinerate the entire shop without breaking a sweat. Behind him, a dozen more soldiers fanned out, weapons ready but not raised. Yet. The dragon commander stepped inside, his head nearly brushing the ceiling that Jake had raised specifically for Ember and Ash. He carried a scanning device that pulsed with soft blue light. When he swept it across the bay, it began beeping insistently. "Dragon DNA," the commander rumbled, his voice like an avalanche. "Recent and concentrated. They're here." Jake's heart hammered, but he kept his face neutral. "Don't know what you're talking about. This is a repair shop. Human-owned, human-operated." The commander's eyes fixed on Jake. Up close, they were terrifying. Ancient and intelligent and completely without mercy. "My name is Brennan, commander of the Empress's personal guard. We have credible intelligence that 2 fugitives from House Thorn are hiding on this station. Our scans indicate they've been in this location. Extensively." Jake leaned against his workbench, trying to look casual even though his legs felt like water. "Never heard of House Thorn. And I don't keep track of every dragon that passes through. This is a public business. Brennan's claws extended slightly. Human, I can smell them. They're here. Probably below us right now. This can end peacefully, or it can end with your station as debris. Your choice. This is human territory, Jake said, his voice steadier than he felt. Meridian Station operates under independent charter. You've got no legal authority to search private property without consent. It was the thinnest legal argument possible. The kind of technicality that wouldn't stop anyone who really wanted to push. But Jake had learned long ago that sometimes you had to bluff when you had nothing else. Brennan took a step forward. The floor groaned under his weight. Heat radiated from his scales. Legal authority. His laugh was harsh. I serve the Dragon Empress. I am the authority. Not here, you're not. The words came from behind Jake. He turned to see old Tom from the cantina standing in the doorway, holding a plasma torch. Not much of a weapon against an Imperial soldier, but the gesture counted. Then Rebecca appeared, the woman who ran the supply depot. Then Danny, the dock chief. Then more. Dozens of humans, filtering out of hiding, forming a loose semicircle around Jake's shop. They weren't armed. Weren't soldiers. Just regular people who'd lived on this forgotten station long enough to know that sometimes you had to stand up, even when it was stupid to do so. Brennan stared at them like they were insects who decided to challenge a hurricane. You're protecting fugitives from the Empire, he said slowly. Do you understand what that means? I could have every one of you arrested. Charged with treason. Then you'll need a bigger ship, Tom said. His voice shook, but he didn't back down. Because we're not moving. Rebecca stepped forward. Jake took in 2 starving kids and gave them a home. We've watched him care for them for 5 years. Feed them. Teach them. Love them like they were his own. You want to take that away? You'll have to go through all of us. Jake felt something catch in his throat. He hadn't asked for this. Hadn't expected it. These people had their own problems, their own struggles. But they were here anyway. Brennan's eyes swept across the crowd. Jake could see calculations happening behind those ancient eyes. Could see him weighing options, considering consequences. The commander's soldiers shifted, waiting for orders. The humans didn't move. Nobody breathed. Finally, Brennan's flames dimmed slightly. His posture changed, just a fraction. I need to speak with you, he said to Jake. Alone. 5 minutes. After that, we can discuss what happens next. No deal, Danny called out. Anything you say to Jake, you say to all of us. But Jake held up his hand. Something in Brennan's voice had changed. The threat was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something that sounded almost like desperation? It's okay, Jake said to the crowd. Give us a few minutes. But stay close. Tom started to protest, but Rebecca touched his arm. The crowd backed up, staying in sight but giving space. Brennan waited until his own soldiers retreated to the doorway. Then he did something Jake never expected. The massive dragon commander sat down, making himself smaller. The aggression drained from his posture. I'm not here to hurt them, Brennan said quietly. I'm here because I've been searching for 5 years. Because I thought they were dead. Because I've dreamed every night about the children I failed to save. Jake's mind raced. What are you talking about? Brennan's claws trembled. My name is Brennan. 5 years ago, I served House Thorn. I was their family's personal guard. And I was the one who smuggled Ember and Ash onto that refugee transport before I fell. The world tilted sideways. I didn't die, Brennan continued. I survived. And I've spent every day since trying to find them. Trying to make things right. Jake stared at the massive dragon sitting in his shop, trying to process what he'd just heard. Brennan, the terrifying commander who'd threatened to turn the station into debris, was the same guard who'd saved Ember and Ash 5 years ago. The one they'd watched fall, surrounded by enemies, the one they'd mourned. They think you're dead, Jake said finally. Brennan's head lowered. I know. I was supposed to be. Took 17 plasma bolts getting them to that ship. Spent 2 months in a military medical bay before I could even move. By the time I recovered, the transport was long gone. No records, no tracking data. They'd vanished completely. Jake's hand stayed near the comm button that would alert Ember and Ash below. He wasn't convinced this wasn't some elaborate trap. So why the warships? Why the show of force? If you're really here to help, why scare everyone half to death? Because I'm not the only one searching, Brennan said. His voice dropped even lower. The Empress herself has been looking for them. The entire Imperial fleet has standing orders to locate any survivors of House Thorn. And when we got a DNA match on their station, I had to move fast before someone else did. The Empress wants them dead, you mean? No. Brennan's eyes blazed. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Everything you think you know, everything they probably told you, it's not the whole truth. Jake felt his anger rising. They told me their family was executed for speaking against the war. For trying to stop the suffering the Empress was causing. Are you saying they lied? I'm saying they only know part of the story. They were children when it happened. They couldn't understand the politics, the power struggles, the things happening behind closed doors. Brennan shifted, his scales scraping against the floor. House Thorn didn't just speak against the expansion. They were right. They had evidence that the war was destroying the Empire from within, creating more enemies than we could ever defeat. They presented it directly to the Empress, begged her to reconsider. And she had them killed for it. No, Brennan said forcefully. She listened. She actually listened. But her military commanders, the generals who'd built their power on conquest, they couldn't allow that. They'd lose everything if the war ended. So they acted without the Empress's knowledge. They fabricated evidence of treason, pushed through emergency tribunals, and executed House Thorn before the Empress even knew what was happening. Jake wanted to call it lies, but something in Brennan's voice rang true. The pain was too real. And the Empress just let it happen? By the time she found out, it was done. House Thorn was gone. The commanders presented it as necessary for security. They buried the truth so deep that it took the Empress 3 years to uncover what really happened. Brennan's claws clenched. When she finally learned the full story, she was furious. She personally executed every commander involved. Ended the expansion wars immediately. Started repatriation programs for refugees. Everything House Thorn had wanted, she implemented. Little late for Ember and Ash's family, Jake said bitterly. Yes. And the Empress knows that. It haunts her. Brennan looked directly at Jake. She spent the last 2 years searching for Ember and Ash specifically. Not to silence them. To restore House Thorn to its rightful place. To give them back everything that was stolen. To make amends for a crime committed in her name. Jake's mind spun. Below him, he knew Ember and Ash were listening through the vents. They designed the shop that way deliberately, so they could hear if Jake was ever in trouble. They were hearing all of this. Why should I believe you? Jake asked. Why should they? Brennan reached slowly into his armor and pulled out something small. He placed it gently on Jake's workbench. It was a medallion, ornate and beautiful, with a design Jake didn't recognize. Dragons intertwined with stars. That's the seal of House Thorn, Brennan said. I've carried it for 5 years. It belonged to their father. He gave it to me the day before he died, made me swear that if anything happened, I'd protect his children. I failed at that. But I never stopped looking. Never stopped hoping. The medallion gleamed in the shop's lights. Jake picked it up carefully. It was warm, almost alive. Ember, Jake called softly. Ash. I think you should come up here. Silence. Then the sound of massive bodies moving through the lower level. The floor hatch opened and 2 dragons emerged, moving slowly, their eyes locked on Brennan. The commander stood, and for a moment, nobody moved. 5 years of separation, 5 years of believing the other was dead, hung in the air like smoke. Then Ember made a sound Jake had never heard before. Something between a cry and a roar. She crossed the distance in 3 bounds and pressed her head against Brennan's chest. Ash followed, more hesitant, but when Brennan's wings wrapped around them both, he collapsed into the embrace. Jake looked away, giving them privacy. Through the shop windows, he could see the crowd outside watching. Some were crying. Even Tom, the tough old cantina owner, was wiping his eyes. The reunion lasted several minutes. When they finally separated, Ember's voice was thick. We saw you fall. There was so much blood. I'm harder to kill than I look, Brennan said gently. I'm sorry it took so long to find you. I'm sorry for everything you went through. Ash's voice was barely a whisper. You said the Empress wants to see us. Wants to restore our house. But we have a life here now. We have, he looked at Jake. We have family. I know, Brennan said. I've been watching the shop for the past 6 hours, before I made contact. I saw how you work together. How the humans here protect you. How you've built something real. He turned to Jake. You saved them. Fed them when they were starving. Protected them when anyone else would have turned them over for a reward. Gave them a home. Jake shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. Just did what needed doing. More than that, Brennan said. You gave them what the entire empire couldn't. Safety. Love. A reason to trust again. He looked back at Ember and Ash. The Empress wants to offer you everything. Titles, wealth, position at court. But she'll want to meet the human who accomplished what all her forces couldn't. She'll want to understand how a simple mechanic succeeded where the empire failed. I'm not going anywhere without Jake, Ember said immediately. Neither am I, Ash added. Brennan nodded slowly. I expected that. But you need to understand what you're asking. Bringing a human to the Imperial Court, it's unprecedented. Impossible by every tradition and law we have. Jake held up his hands. Look, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not cut out for Imperial politics. This is my home. My shop. These two are welcome to go claim their heritage. I'll be fine here. Both dragons turned to look at him with identical expressions of betrayal. You think we'd just leave? Ember's voice rose. After everything? You're our family, Ash said simply. And Jake realized that no matter what happened next, no matter what the Empress wanted or what traditions said, these two weren't going anywhere without him. Which meant things were about to get very complicated. 3 days after Brennan's arrival, the Empress herself came to Outpost Meridian. Jake had expected another show of force, more warships, more soldiers. Instead, a single sleek vessel docked quietly at the station's main port. No fanfare, no announcements. She came almost like a ghost, slipping into the forgotten corner of space where Jake had built his small life. The station went into lockdown anyway. Everyone knew who was aboard that ship. The Dragon Empress, ruler of half the known galaxy, was walking among them. Jake was in his shop, trying to focus on replacing a fuel injector, when Brennan entered with a dragon that made everyone else look small. She was ancient, her scales a deep crimson that seemed to hold entire galaxies in their depths. Her eyes were gold, sharp enough to cut through lies and excuses. She moved with absolute confidence, like gravity itself bent to her will. This was power. Real, undeniable power. Ember and Ash stood near Jake, their bodies tense. They'd spent the last 3 days arguing about this meeting. The Empress wanted them to return, to reclaim their position as nobility, to restore House Thorn to its former glory. But they'd refused unless Jake came with them. The Empress had apparently found this request amusing. And insulting. And impossible. Now she was here to settle it personally. She studied the shop with those ancient eyes. Took in the modified ceiling, the reinforced floors, the small touches that showed how Jake had adapted his space for his dragon family. Her gaze lingered on the observation deck visible through the back window, where 3 chairs sat in a row. 1 human-sized, 2 much larger. Finally, she looked at Ember and Ash. And bowed. Jake had never seen a dragon bow before. Didn't think they could. But the Empress lowered her massive head, her wings spreading in a gesture Brennan had explained meant deepest respect and regret. Children of House Thorn, she said, her voice resonating through the entire shop. I failed your family. I failed you. The crimes committed in my name can never be forgiven, but I offer you everything in my power to make amends. Come home. Claim what was stolen. Take your rightful place among the highest nobility of the empire. Ember's tail wrapped around Jake's waist, a protective gesture she developed over the years. Only if Jake comes with us. The Empress straightened, her expression shifting to something harder. A human? In the Imperial Court? Child, you don't understand what you're asking. Our traditions go back 10,000 years. No human has ever served in the inner circle. It would cause chaos, rebellion among the conservative houses. Then we're not interested, Ash said quietly. The Empress's eyes flashed with anger. Real anger that made the temperature in the shop rise 10 degrees. You would throw away your heritage, your family's legacy, for this. She gestured at Jake like he was a piece of scrap metal. And that's when Jake got mad. He'd been quiet up until now, letting Ember and Ash handle their own business. But nobody talked about his family like that. Not even an Empress who could probably vaporize him with a thought. With all due respect, Jake said, his voice tight, I'm standing right here. The Empress turned those golden eyes on him. You. The mechanic. Brennan tells me you saved them. Fed them. Sheltered them. I gave 2 starving kids some food, Jake said. Anyone with a conscience would have done the same. Would they? The Empress moved closer. Each step deliberate, predatory. Most would have seen profit. Dragon hatchlings sell for fortunes on the black market. Or they would have seen danger and turned away. Or they would have reported them to authorities for a reward. But you did none of these things. Why? Jake met her gaze, refusing to back down even though his survival instincts were screaming at him. Because they were scared and hungry and alone. Because I've been there. Because it was the right thing to do. The right thing, the Empress repeated. And now they won't leave without you. They've made you their condition for returning to their birthright. Do you understand what you've done? You've made yourself essential to the restoration of one of our greatest houses. I didn't make myself anything. I just took care of 2 kids who needed help. For 5 years. No reward, no recognition, considerable personal expense and risk. Why? Jake glanced at Ember and Ash. Saw them watching him with those eyes that had gone from terrified and dull to bright and confident. Remembered every late night fixing ships together, every meal shared, every conversation about the stars. Because they're my family, Jake said simply. That's what family does. The Empress was silent for a long moment. Then she did something completely unexpected. She laughed. Not a mocking laugh, but something genuine and surprised. 5 years I've searched, she said. Spent countless resources, deployed my best forces, promised rewards beyond measure. And they chose a mechanic with a small shop and a big heart. She looked at Ember and Ash with something that might have been respect. Your father would be proud. He always valued character over politics. Then you'll let Jake come? Ember asked hopefully. Let him? The Empress's eyes gleamed. Child, I'm not sure I have a choice. You've made your position clear. And I suspect if I tried to separate you by force, I'd have this entire station to contend with. She glanced toward the windows where, sure enough, a crowd had gathered. Tom, Rebecca, Danny, and dozens more, watching. The Empress turned back to Jake. Very well, mechanic. House Thorn returns to the Imperial Court, with their guardian. But understand this, you'll be the first human ever to hold such a position. Many will hate you for it. Some will try to use you. Others will test you constantly. Can you handle that? Jake thought about it. Really thought about it. He'd built a quiet life here, away from politics and power games. Going to the Imperial Court meant giving that up, stepping into a world he didn't understand, facing challenges he wasn't prepared for. But Ember and Ash weren't leaving without him. And he wasn't leaving without them. I'll handle it, Jake said. But I've got conditions too. The Empress's eyebrows rose. You dare negotiate with me? Yeah, I do. First, my shop becomes an embassy. Human territory on whatever world you put us on. Second, any human who wants asylum in the Empire gets consideration, no automatic rejections. Third, I keep my independence. I'm not your subject, I'm their guardian. We work together, or not at all. The shop went dead silent. Brennan looked like he'd swallowed his tongue. Even Ember and Ash seemed shocked at Jake's boldness. The Empress stared at Jake for what felt like an eternity. Then, impossibly, she smiled. Done, she said. All of it. You've got nerve, mechanic. No wonder they chose you. She extended one massive claw. Do we have an agreement? Jake shook her claw, his hand disappearing in her grip. We do. 6 months later, Jake's repair shop stood on the grounds of the Imperial Palace, a small human building among dragon towers. The sign still read Wilson's Repairs in faded letters. Inside, Jake still fixed broken things, though now they were usually state-of-the-art Imperial vessels instead of beat-up refugee transports.